On this mini prequel episode, we've got our fan poll follow-up for Mockingjay Part 1, and we're previewing The Hunger Games Mockingjay Part 2. Hello and welcome back to this Film Lit podcast where we talk about movies that are based on books. If you're listening to this when it comes out, it's probably Sunday. It's a weird time for a release, but we talked about it. We're doing a little mini episode to get your reaction for part 1 of The Hunger Games. And then part 2 of Mockingjay will be out Wednesday, wrapping up our summer series. This mini prequel is going to be pretty short. We're going to get right into our first segment and thank our patrons. We have 2 new patrons to shout out this week, and they are both $5 Hugo Award-winning patrons, which means they get access to our bonus content, and they are Valerie Thomas and My Best Friend is Cooler Than Yours. Thank you to both of you for signing on at the $5 level. Appreciate you both very much. We have our Academy Award winners, and they are Kat Ensminger, Ben Wilcox, Jeff Niederhofer, Ian from Wine Country, Support Your Local Library, and Your Local Rebellion, Winchester's Forever, Kelly Napier, Gray Hightower, Eli Youngs, Gratch, Just Gratch, Shelby Says Black Lives and Trans Lives Matter, V. Frank, I Hate Peter Malark, and Alina Starkov. strong opinion there expressed in that second to last patron. I don't know if I hate Peter Malark, but we'll discuss it in the main episode. We'll get into lots about all of that when we get to our main episode for Mockingjay Part 2. Right now, we want to find out what you all had to say about Mockingjay Part 1.
Yeah, well, that's just like your opinion, man.
All right, so on Patreon, we had 1 vote for the book, 1 for the movie, and 1 person who could not decide how they wanted to vote. Mm-hmm. Diane Takaki said, FYI, I am now imagining Jennifer Lawrence singing Empty Chairs at Empty Tables when Katniss goes back to Victor's village a la Marius and Les Mis, and I'm into it.
Makes sense. I feel like this is a thing that just needs to happen.
I got really excited when I was reading in the book and they went into the sewers.
Yeah.
I was like, holy shit, this is just Les Mis.
Les Mis.
Over on Facebook, we had 1 vote for the book and 2 for the movie. Tracy said, I'm picking the movie because the other 2 books I read each in a weekend. They were so good. This one I was really only a fan of in the last third of the book. So since this movie covers the first half, the movie gave me more from other points of view and gave me more of the story. Mm-hmm. And that has been a strength of the films overall, is getting to leave Katniss's head.
Yeah,
so especially if you didn't enjoy the book particularly, I imagine that would be a big strength.
If you didn't like the first half of this book as much as the second half, then for sure.
Over on Twitter, we had 6 votes for the book, 4 for the movie, and 5 people who couldn't or wouldn't decide.
Yeah.
Shelby Suderman said, this is the book I've enjoyed the most during this reread, so I'm holding off on picking just yet. It's weird to me that saving the other tributes isn't part of Katniss's demands in the book, only the pardon afterwards. Her making that a demand in the movie makes more sense to me. You mentioned the scene where Katniss dreams that Peeta finds her after a nightmare, but my favorite thing about that moment is it's a beat-for-beat recreation of the scene from Catching Fire when they're on the tour. I always read the scene with the elk as the prey in 13 as never having developed the survival awareness the way the prey in 12 did, and the people in the districts never did. Wait.
I assume she means the elk as the same as the people of 13.
Yes.
Like the elk represents the people of 13 who did not learn to survive
and the people,
in the same way.
And I said the people in the districts did. I read that wrong.
Yeah.
They have no idea what they don't know because they were never forced to learn. Yeah, I like that interpretation.
Yeah. I mean, they survive differently. They also have pretty strong survival. I don't know, because like 13 has pretty distinct strong. It's like the whole reason they're like a nightmare dystopian society is because of their survival instinct. So I don't know. I think it's a little. I don't know. I see what she's saying.
Different survival instinct.
Yeah, I see what she's saying, but I think I don't know. Still not sold on that scene and its meaning yet.
I like how in the scene where Peeta warns them in the
Assuming
movie...
that is what she was saying, because I'm trying to interpret what she wrote. That I may have misrepresented her point there, so I just want to clarify that. Sorry.
I like how in the scene where PETA warns them in the movie, he gets to react to Katniss in their broadcast. I liked giving him that moment after we've been seeing only Katniss's reactions to PETA's propos. I like the detail that the hovercraft they use when they're going to get the tributes is named Mockingjay 1, more because it fits with them naming the poison pill after the berries than just a movie title drop.
I missed that.
I missed that too. I did not catch that detail.
Not at all.
Patrick Wood said, I've been reading/watching along with you, but this is the first episode I've finished in time to comment on.
Hooray.
I read the books as they came out, but have never seen the movies before.
Hey, that was me.
I was a big fan of the original book and enjoyed the second and third books much more this time around.
It's also me.
Look at everything you have in common with this person.
So far, like, exactly me.
I don't have strong feelings about whether the first half of the book or this movie is better, so I'll just give some general thoughts on each. Something I noticed on this read-through of this series, and something that you guys have discussed, is how Katniss has trouble understanding other characters' motivations. So I found it interesting that at the beginning of the book, Katniss immediately drew comparisons between 13 and the Capitol in regards to using her by trying to shape her image and control her autonomy. I was on the fence on whether I thought this was some sort of character growth for Katniss, or perhaps Suzanne Collins speaking through the character and trying to drive home the similarities between the Capitol and 13. But I could have been reading too much into that.
I think it's both.
I think it's both as well.
I think it's both. I think it's supposed to be character growth. Like, maybe not character growth is the wrong word, but like, because of her experience, I guess character growth is the right word. I guess I don't want to necessarily assign like a moral, like, a morality to her learning to like perceive other people's motivations better. But I think that is what's happening, is that she's better through her experiences. She has become better at
she has become more adept at that,
at understanding external actors' motivations and why they're doing the things they are. Again, I don't want to say, I hesitate to call it character growth, because I think that can apply like a moral goodness to it that I don't know if is like necessarily the case so much as it is just like an adaptive response that she's kind of had. But I also think it's very specifically Suzanne Collins trying to drive home the similarities.
I definitely think
because that's the part that sticks out super obviously.
Yeah, trying to hit us over the head with that point.
It's not subtle like at all, yeah.
But I do think it also counts as, like you said, maybe we don't necessarily label it growth, but it is character development.
Yeah, maybe that's
where she's been through these previous experiences and now is able to apply that knowledge.
Yeah.
I definitely agree that it was a little dull that Collins tried for the bland communism parallel for District 13. It just reminded me of learning about different government systems in my Deep South elementary school and how disingenuous the discussion of communism was in hindsight. Mm-hmm. I won't say much about the movie, as I found it watchable but not particularly engaging. I think the strongest aspect of this film series has been the production design, costumes, and some of the performances. All three were again the strongest part of this film for me. I really liked the look of 13. It's different from anything we've seen so far in this series. And while the costumes were admittedly duller in this one, I admire the fact that they had Jennifer Lawrence in that horrible gray jumpsuit for almost the entire movie, because when I was reading the book, I was sure the movie was going to find a way to have her wear something else for most of it. I kind of thought, like, yeah, maybe they will find an excuse to put her in a ball gown. But
yeah, I didn't. I thought, because I think the movies have been, apart from sort of in the early ones, because of the audience, sort of downplaying the brutality of the games and stuff, and like how like horribly like physically affected she is by them afterwards and during. Apart from that, I think the movies had done a fairly good job of not like overly, because it is the point of like the series in a lot of ways. The movies didn't overly like sexualize her in a way that felt counter to anything in the because that is such a huge part of the point, like with the Capitol and the games and the prep teams and all that sort of stuff, and the way they sexualize these children before they send them off to slaughter and all that. Up until this point, the movies hadn't found ways to, sneak, like, I don't know, to make her more like physically attractive or whatever than the book calls for in any given scene.
Yeah, that's fair.
And so I wasn't expecting them to here, I guess, because it felt like they had stayed committed to that sort of thematic premise and weren't interested in sort of violating that. Again, apart from she's not quite as dirty and horrifying as she should be, but...
There were also 2 scenes where I thought the director/DP did some interesting things with colored lighting. I thought that the use of the kind of gross, harsh yellow lighting in the hospital scene was off-putting and reflected Katniss's feelings of discomfort. I also really liked the use of red lighting in the PETA rescue scene. I thought it looked striking, and that set piece was my favorite scene in the movie.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, there's definitely some good choices visually throughout the movies, color-wise, in all of them, but more so in this one, really, in retrospect, because the first one was just lots of gray for the most part. We don't have a lot of, except when you get to the Capitol and stuff like that. But yeah, I agree. I thought there was some cool stuff in this one.
And Minty to the 7th Power said, "This is the only one of the trilogy where I prefer the movies to the book, though I think both book and movies are collectively the worst of the series. Although, oh my god, yes, I remember when you guys said that Finnick fucked his way through the Capitol, and I cringed so hard because I remembered why and how, but you guys didn't know yet."
We didn't know.
No. But I also think that is a testament to how well Suzanne Collins set that up and then paid it off, because that's kind of the point.
That's the point, yeah.
That's Katniss initially sees him that way, and so do we, the reader. And then later on, we get the rug pulled out from under us.
Yeah, it's very intentional and yeah, obviously very effective because it worked really well.
And finally, over on Instagram, we had 7 votes for the book and 4 for the movie. Jedianne said, "I don't think I'm giving away too much by saying that I was way more interested in Finnick and Annie's relationship than Katniss and Peeta/Gale. More thoughts about this post part 2.
I agree that their relationship is really interesting, and I wish we had more exploration of it,
I
more
wish we had gotten a
backstory.
little more backstory
Because
on
it is,
them, sure.
It is a thing that I've distinctly felt this time was, and I just don't remember at all what I felt the first time. I don't even remember Finnick being a character in the third book, honestly. Like, upon my memory, I remembered him in the second one. I didn't even remember he was still part of because I just remembered nothing about the third book. But it did feel this time like their relationship in this book and them getting married and everything sort of, which that's spoilers for part 2, but did sort of come out, not out of nowhere, but it felt like very little groundwork was done for it.
The thing that's weird to me is that their relationship is occasionally held up as like almost a foil or like an ideal to everything that Katniss has going on. Yeah. But we know so little about it that it's not a particularly effective comparison.
And it raises lots of questions too, because we know that Annie suffers from unnamed but numerous like mental sort of disorders or whatever. Like she's dealing with lots of things to the point where we're not really sure like what is going on with her, and it does raise interesting questions about their relationship in terms of like consent and because we don't know. I think it's very clearly that she's in general like I don't think there's any issues there, at least from as with the reading in the book, but it does. Their relationship is really interesting because of what little we know about her.
I think it's briefly mentioned that he was her mentor, right? Yeah. Yeah.
There's interesting dynamics to their relationship that made me go, I would want to know more about that. It seems all above board, but we don't know. But it also has like little flags that are like kind of strange to me. I don't know. I just thought the whole thing was like, it just felt like we didn't get enough of their relationship for the, like you said, the way it was presented as sort of this positive, because again, I don't think that Peeta and Gale and her relationships are necessarily supposed to be negative. They're just complicated and whatever.
Yeah,
but
they're messy.
And Annie's and Finnick's is presented as this unmessy, like sort of idyllic version, but it's hard to just accept that at face value when we have like little crumbs of the dynamics of their relationship that make me think it can't be nearly as like idyllic as it's presented, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe we're supposed to take that and understand that Katniss is also on the outside of that and young and maybe
sort of just
seeing it as more idyllic than it actually is.
Yeah.
But it is, it's kind of frustrating.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's as effective as maybe she wanted it to be.
Yeah.
And our last comment is from Them Cultured Vultures, who said, like Brian, this is the closest I get to preferring the movie over the book. Having done no research, I got a real kick out of seeing Jamie Moriarty, Foggy Nelson, and Amos Burton
That's
as Katniss's film team.
From The Expanse. Amos, yeah.
It was interesting to hear that you were underwhelmed by the hospital hovercraft heroism. That was a moment I thought the direction and cinematography really stood out. I was underwhelmed by that. You were not. You liked it. Well, I was
about to say, I distinctly mentioned how cool I thought that shot of the hovercraft going into, unless I'm thinking of a different moment, or they're talking about a different moment. Hospital hovercraft heroism.
I think they're probably referring to me having questions about wouldn't they hear the hovercraft.
Yeah, because I very distinctly mentioned how cool I thought that shot was and cool. The way the sound drops out and everything. I agree 100%.
Yeah. Hashtag release the PETA chokeout final cut shot.
For real. I mean, you don't have to release anything. You can just you can just pause the movie there and turn it off. Like, it's possible. You can do that. What were the final numbers?
The book, with 15 votes to the movie's 11. So this was much closer than our last few polls have been, and closer than the other two.
Yeah, by far.
In the installment were. We also had 6 voters who couldn't choose or wanted to delay judgment like we did.
Fantastic. Thank you, everybody, for your feedback on very short notice. We appreciate it. Lots of good stuff in there. And we hope you will respond after Mockingjay Part 2, because that is going to be an interesting one. All right, speaking of Mockingjay Part 2, let's learn a little bit about the movie.
I've been watching you, and you watching me. My dear Miss Everdeen, make no mistake, the game is coming to its end.
For the first time in our lifetimes, we're standing together with 13 districts. Our future starts tomorrow at dawn, when we march together into the Capitol. To slow our attacks, President Snow is building a minefield of traps. The sadistic inventions of game makers meant to make sport of our deaths.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 76th Hunger Games.
Mockingjay Part 2 is a 2015 film, once again directed by Francis Lawrence and written by Peter Craig and Danny Strong. It stars our returning cast, as well as Eugenie Bondurant as Tigress, Gwendolyn Christie as Commander Lime. So, Misty and Kim Ormison as Liege 1 and 2, and Joe Crest as Mitchell. Those were all the new names that I saw. There may be other people that I missed. Those were most of the new characters, to be fair, I think. I think everybody else made an appearance in a previous film. Maybe. The film has a 69% on Rotten Tomatoes, a 65 on Metacritic, and a 6.6 out of 10 on IMDb, which puts it just barely above the scores for Part 1 on Rotten Tomatoes and Metacritic, like a point or two above.
Yeah.
And the 6.6 IMDb score is identical to Part 1. The film made $658 million against a budget of $160 million, which fell short of expectations and also made it the lowest grossing in the entire film series, which is interesting for the finale.
Yeah.
My guess is that a lot of would be my. I don't know. There's a lot of things. So one, Force Awakens came out like the same time, which pulled a lot of dollars, obviously. But also, I wouldn't be surprised if the sort of lukewarm or less warm reaction to this novel compared to
the
previous
agree.
ones, as well as the first movie. I mean, the first movie it was fine. Obviously, we almost picked it over the book, but I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if sort of people's some people's negative feelings towards how the series ended.
Yeah.
Definitely probably kind of colored who
Well,
went and
and
saw
like
it.
thinking back, it also seems to me like that the series didn't maintain like interest
No.
as well as some other series
Yeah.
that we've talked about did.
Yeah.
It seemed to me like by the time we got to these last like final installments, like just
People had
general
moved on.
interest had waned.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that has to do with the way the series went, and because it's before the movies, I only ever saw the first movie, and I had already read all 3 books. I think I can't recall, or maybe I'd read the first 2 or something. And obviously we talked about how my interest and liking of the books the first time I read them 10 years ago or whatever decreased as I read them to the point where I did not like the third one much at all. That has changed, spoilers. But I do think a lot of that has to do with Suzanne Collins had a very specific goal with this series that is very hard. It's not enjoyable. Mm-hmm. And that was her point. And we'll talk about this a lot in the main episode. But the series is intentionally sort of nihilistic in a way and like horrible and ends that way on purpose, I think. And I get what she's doing, but it also means people aren't gonna go see the movies, like or less.
Fewer people
it
are
makes
gonna...
a movie series that is much less satisfying and is going to like make people not. Again, I get it. We'll talk about it. It's just it doesn't surprise me that the series sort of lost steam as it went because of the very specific choices Suzanne Collins made with the series. Could do nothing but lose steam in terms of like rushing out to the theaters to see it. Like if you've read the third book and know what happens, I'm not like we're watching the movie tonight. I'm not like excited to watch the movie.
No,
you know what I mean? And again, we'll get into it. I actually enjoyed the third one a lot more this time. I understand what the point is, and I get it, and I think it's effective mostly. But still, it doesn't mean I'm excited to watch it all happen. You know what I mean? Like so I think that had a lot that wouldn't surprise me if that also had a fair amount to do with it. The movie was filmed back-to-back with Part 1 starting in September of 2013. We had discussed that Philip Seymour Hoffman died with 1 week of filming remaining, so the majority of his scenes were already shot, but it was initially announced, apparently, that he would be digitally recreated for one major scene involving him that hadn't been filmed yet. Later, they decided against that and rewrote the scenes to compensate for his absence. The scene that's changed is after everything has happened, Plutarch is talking to her. I think it's the scene when they're in like the hovercraft and he's explaining everything that's happened, like what all transpired. And they just made Haymitch do it and like it's reading a letter from Plutarch or something like that.
Interesting.
So it's a similar scene because I think there's a couple distinct moments because I was reading that scene going, well, this must be the scene they're talking about. And because it's the only scene where they like in this whole second half of the book where Plutarch and Katniss would even have a like conversation. Yeah. And I was like, it has to be this scene. And my guess is that there's a few distinct like moments in that kind of don't make sense coming from Haymitch, but only make sense coming from Plutarch. So they just made it a letter or something. Like that's all I can imagine. And for that time, I'm really glad 2014 that they didn't decide to do anything digitally. That would have been a nightmare. I don't even know. Who knows what they meant by that? That could have meant like we're gonna manipulate his voice and like use like it's gonna be like a. Like I doubt they were gonna try to do like Tarkin from Rogue One,
right?
Or, Rogue. What's that movie called? The one where they blow up the desk or they get the plants. Is it called Rogue One? Why? Yeah, my brain blanked it. I thought it had a different name for some reason. I doubt they were planning that because the technology wasn't there at the time. But they may have been trying to think of do something where they could utilize in some way. But no, they just decided against it, which I think is probably the best choice. So many of the capital scenes in the finale were shot in Paris and Berlin. There's a circular apartment complex where the toxic oil trap goes off, a big set piece in the book. That's a real apartment complex called the Espaces Abraxas. Espaces? It's French, so I don't know. My French is real rusty. Abraxas is in a suburb of Paris, France. I looked up pictures. We haven't watched the movie yet, but I was like, oh, that's gnarly. It looks like something out of a sci-fi movie. Apparently it's real. Apparently the only thing they really did was they removed a bunch of trees that are normally in the courtyard. Otherwise, very few alterations were made.
Digitally removed.
Yes.
They didn't chop down
CGI,
trees.
CGI removed some trees. There's also a huge underground place room that the Squad 451 enters when they go through the sewers. And that is also a real place in Japan. It's called the Metropolitan Area Outer Underground Discharge Channel, which if you go look up pictures of this, it's wild. It's the world's largest underground floodwater diversion facility. It's located between Tokyo and Kasukabe in Saitama. And it literally looks like the mines of Moria. Like when you look at the pictures, there's pictures of people like walking around in it. And I'm sure we'll see it in the movie later. It's crazy. It looks like the mines of Moria. I was like, that's a real place, apparently.
You know, we've never talked about it, but it must have been really interesting to get to scout locations for this series.
Yeah, absolutely. So the consoles in District 13 and their control center were originally built for the Mission Control Center set in Apollo 13. They were later acquired by Prop House and then rented out for these movies. Several of these consoles, still with the badges reading Pan Am and property of Capital District Defense Forces, were apparently used in the Mercury Control Center set for a film we also did, Hidden Figures. So that's interesting. Wish we had known that before Hidden Figures.
Yeah,
could have
looked for it.
So Joanna tells Katniss that the president can be killed if the assassin is willing to die for it. Her actual words, and this is a movie line, I don't think this is in the book. I don't remember it. I just read most of it this morning.
I don't remember
I don't recall this line, so I think this is a movie ad. And her actual words are apparently paraphrasing a statement made by John F. Kennedy at one point, who said, quote, "If anyone is crazy enough to want to kill a president of the United States, he can do it. All he must be prepared to do is give his life for the president's." So I think that was a movie ad that they were inspired by that quote from Kennedy. The only film in the franchise that did not receive a Golden Globe nomination for Best Original Song.
Womp womp.
Womp womp. So at the end of the film, when the victors are seated around a circular table, there is a bowl in the middle, in a hutch behind Katniss, and it is the bowl from the first Hunger Games movie at the end where Seneca Crane walks into the room and it's full of the berries. That bowl is in the background of that scene, so look out for that. The film received generally positive reviews from critics, praising the action and performances, but criticizing splitting it into two movies. I actually think that splitting it into two movies makes a lot of sense and works really well here. Reading the book where the split was, it actually felt a very natural. Like I almost felt like I was starting a new book when we got into the second half. It felt very natural.
Yeah, I mean, there's a very natural split. She leaves 13.
Yeah,
like right around in the half.
Yeah,
at the halfway point.
And we get the big Pete is rescued, and that's the big like set piece finale. I think the split makes a lot of sense. I understand why. Like traditionally, a book of this length would be adapted into a single movie. Like it's only 400 pages. It's not that long.
Right,
of a novel.
It's not some hulking behemoth.
Yeah, so I understand why traditionally, but I think it makes sense and I think it works. And they were able to do it then without making tons of cuts to what they're showing in the film. Manohla Dargis from the New York Times praised Jennifer Lawrence's character, saying, quote, "Katniss is the right heroine for these neo-feminist times," end quote. Stephen Whitty from New York Daily News had a more negative review, saying, quote, "Remember that line from the first Hunger Games film? May the odds be ever in your favor? Yeah, well, the luck has run out," end quote. Tom Huddleston of Time Out gave the film 4 out of 5 stars. He praised the ending of the film as genuinely powerful and commented that, quote, "This might be the most downbeat blockbuster in memory, a film that starts out pitiless and goes downhill from there, save for a fleeting glimmer of hope in the final moments. It's a bold statement about the unforgiving nature of war, unashamedly political in its motives, and quietly devastating in its emotional effect."
I think that quote really nails why this works better as novels. Than movies, like generally, because as far as blockbusters go, pretty bleak. And we're not used to bleak blockbusters.
And that's the thing that's tough with this series, and maybe we'll talk about more in the main episode, is that adapting the series is like when you go into it's a YA novel series with a love triangle-ish with action and adventure. And harrowing stuff and like, somewhat and interesting political stuff. But especially in the first one, and I don't remember like, you know, when they agreed to make the series, like where she was in like when the rights got bought and stuff, like where she was in this, like had she written Mockingjay yet? Did they know where the series was going? Because I think there are movies here that make perfect sense, and I think these movies probably actually do a pretty good job. And we'll see once we see this last one today in terms of adapting it. But it's definitely a series that maybe makes less sense adapting it as a summer blockbuster, like PG-13 action series, a la, you know, Twilight, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, whatever. Makes less sense as that and more sense as like a gritty art house, like... Maybe not art house because it would require bigger budgets.
Yeah,
like
we need the budgets.
But something in the vein of like a Dune or something that like Denis Villeneuve would adapt, or
something a little moodier,
a little darker, a little more ponderous, and just because their audience, like the audience they're trying to appeal to, and I really do applaud them at least so far for not. Apart from dialing down some of the brutality, not like, again, we'll see where the second movie, how it wraps up, but not like trying to turn the movies into something they're not, like in terms of like trying to turn them into just like feel good blockbusters that like popcorn fare overall. Like they really did, which is kind of amazing that they would do that. You know what I mean? That they would take the series and stick to the guns of the... Again, we'll see. We haven't watched the second one yet. Maybe they make a huge change or something. But anyways, it is an interesting... It's almost like this weird bait and switch because the series feels like it's going to be one thing and then becomes something else entirely.
Yes.
And, which is why I think a lot of people found it disappointing. And it's definitely why I found it disappointing as when I was younger. And I think it is an interesting sort of experiment in like... filmmaking of like this thing is not what they thought it was gonna be, but they were already in, and it was making enough money that they're like, I guess we'll just make this horrible, bleak like war drama, like this nihilistic. Okay, I guess that's what we're doing. I don't know. It's interesting, and I keep saying nihilistic. It's not completely. Obviously, there is, as the reviewer mentioned, you know. It ends on more of a hopeful note than potentially the rest of the novel sort of implies. I think it is interesting that it almost feels like the epilogue was like the publisher, like, you can't end the series this way. You have to, it has to be happier than this. Like, I don't know. Yeah. We'll talk about it. And then my final note is that apparently, so in 2015 or something, or something like that. 2018, sometime in the last few years.
Recent.
Sometimes in the last few years, Suzanne Collins released a prequel to the series called The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, where Coriolanus Snow is the protagonist of the novel, which
is interesting.
Complicated opinions from people. But in August of 2021, so this month, Lionsgate Motion Picture Group chairman Joe Drake revealed that the film was in pre-production, with filming expected to begin in early 2022 for a targeted release of either late 2023 or early 2024. Okay. So apparently that's going to be a movie. The Songbird and Snakes is coming, and we will have to do it at some point.
Yeah, I guess we'll have to. Because I was thinking that I might do that book as like an extra... like Patreon bonus thing, like I did for Midnight Sun. But if it's going to be a movie,
apparently, well, and who knows, things could change.
True,
but it would appear that it is in the works.
Well, we'll see how it plays out then.
Yeah. Yes, we will. All right, that's all we had for this little bit of info about Mockingjay Part 2. Katie, where can people watch it?
Well, as always, you can check with your local library and see if they have a copy that you can rent. Or if you still have one last hanging on local video rental store, check with them. If you don't want to do either of those things, you can stream this with ads / a subscription through Peacock or Peacock Premium. Or you can rent it for around $3 to $4 on Apple TV, Amazon, YouTube, Vudu, Redbox, DirecTV, or AMC Theaters on Demand.
There you go. So we'll be wrapping this thing up on Wednesday. As I mentioned earlier, I'm actually not particularly looking forward to watching this movie. I am interested to see, what they change, what happens, but it's one of those things where when you know how it ends going in, I'm just like, bleh.
Do you know what the runtime on this sucker is?
It's not super. It's like 2:10. It's only a little bit longer than the last movie.
All right.
I mean, it's not like 2 hours and 40 minutes or anything like that. It's a little bit over 2 hours. So, but it's 2:16, I think. But 10 minutes of that's credits probably or something. So
True.
if not more.
Yeah.
So with how many people worked on these films. So yeah, we're gonna be watching that this evening and talking about it, recording tomorrow to come out on Sunday. And yeah, it should be an interesting one. I have lots of notes. And again, not to spoil anything, but my appraisal of the series is more positive as a series overall, including the third book. I still have some thoughts, but it is much more positive. Just kind of going in the series, I look at as a whole much more positively than I did having read them 10 years ago, which I kind of expected.
Yeah.
But that was the case. But yeah, we'll get into all the nitty gritty, all the details of that on Wednesday. Until that time, guys, gals, non-binary pals, everybody else,
Keep reading books.
keep watching movies,
and keep being awesome.